We've really witnessed a historic shift that has changed the world order. This was the first time a US president had spoken with Putin since the invasion of 2022.
That phone call between US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin shifted global alliances.
From the very beginning of the war,
you're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Relations between Trump and Zelensky have deteriorated since then. I think it's inevitable that we're going to be facing Cold War-style military spending. There's going to be competition for resources.
Even with a ceasefire on the table, US military support for Ukraine and Europe as a whole is no longer assured. That means Europe's future ability to contain Russia has become less certain. But what is clear is that over a decade of sanctions have not worked.
Russia's economy has weathered the war and sanctions much better than many Western analysts forecast.
The world and G7 applied some of the harshest measures on Russia and still hasn't been able to deter it.
From the Kremlin's point of view, the economy isn't the primary concern right now. Putin's focused on achieving his goals in Ukraine and achieving his goals in confrontation with the West.
So how has Russia's economy survived the war? And is there anything left in the toolbox to check its military power?
Russia's economy basically is down to two things. First, this is export of energy products, oil, natural gas. The second driver of the Russian economy is war. The military-industrial complex is the most dynamic part of Russian economy at the moment.
The Russian government has been pumping huge sums of money into the economy, both to support defense production and to support businesses and sectors that have been affected by international sanctions. The military is now competing with the civilian sector for labor and for men to go to the front. And the only way for many civilian industries to compete with that is to increase their own salaries. That stoked demand to a level that the economy isn't really able to meet. The economy has been overheating in that regard.
Overheating means inflation, which spiked in 2022. Capital controls and interest rates managed it briefly, but since mid-2023, it's been on the rise.
This inflation problem is a salient one. It means that Russia's central bank needs to keep its monetary policy pretty tight. Russia's interest rates now are close to 21%.
Interest rates this high make it difficult for private, non-defense affiliated corporations to do business. Despite these headwinds, Russia has a lot of fiscal space. Russian spending, shown here in orange bars, hasn't led to much debt since federal revenue, reflected by the blue bars, has roughly been equal. This means that the deficit is under 3%. Looking at how much oil and gas brings in, you can see how important energy is to the Russian economy.
Russia now produces around 10.4 million barrels a day. This puts Russia as the third largest producer of oil, just behind US and Saudi Arabia.
The Russian government taxes the sales and the revenues, and it receives dividends as a major stakeholder in most of the corporations that are involved.
The stability of price and supply for oil is a global priority, but it's also an Achilles heel. Russian oil is restricted only above the price cap of $60 a barrel.
Going back to the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, sanctions targeted both Russian oil producers, financial institutions, but they were designed in a way that Russia would keep producing oil to essentially avoid an energy price shock.
There was real worry that putting stricter sanctions on Russian oil would cause gas prices in the US to rise.
The oil markets are tight in the sense that there's no potential supply that can replace Russia's exports at the moment.
Another limit to the power of sanctions is the fungible nature of the world's most traded commodity.
Oil can be sold, it can be resold and traded, and this means that there are a lot of opportunities to work around sanctions and restrictions.
About 10 days before Biden was due to leave office, he imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet of tankers that it uses to transport oil outside of Western restrictions. It also imposed sanctions on Surgut Neftegas and Gazprom Neft, two major Russian oil producers. And that really was an attempt by the Biden administration to put Ukraine in the best possible position. Now, critics claim that this was too little too late.
Along with oil, Russia has the largest natural gas reserves in the world. In 2021, the EU imported almost half of its gas from Russia. Norway provided about a quarter, and the US just 6%. By 2023, Russia's share dropped to 15%. With Norway and the US largely filling the gap, Russia lost its primary gas market. But it continued to make billions from oil sold to other regions.
China was already a very large importer of Russian energy and minerals, and that's increased considerably as Europe has closed off its markets to Russia.
Before 2022, India imported about 1% of its oil from Russia. It's now importing anywhere from 35 to 40% of its oil from Russia.
China's currency, the yuan, has become the dominant way for Russians to buy goods and get paid internationally. Average citizens are even using it for household savings.
China has been a crucial conduit for Russia to import semiconductors and microelectronics that it needs for its precision-guided weaponry it's used to target Ukraine. If India and China had been following Western sanctions, Russia would have a much harder time sustaining the war.
Yet Russia's heavy reliance on its Asian trading partners does expose vulnerabilities.
Both Russia's tight monetary policy and new sanctions imposed at the start of the year by the Biden administration will combine into the perfect conditions for Russia recession.
The price of butter and potatoes had shot up because of labor shortages and high inflation. This had started to affect ordinary Russians. Putin really does need some breathing room and sanctions relief to regroup and rearm. Western officials put Russian casualties at around 800,000 killed and wounded since 2022. Now that is an enormous loss for any country to take.
Our reading of history and literature suggests that large military dominant nations tend to retreat when there's domestic public pressure in favor of concluding or ending military conflicts.
Gauging Russian public opinion, however, is very difficult due to the opacity of the state.
Russia is an authoritarian state. There are no political freedoms. There are hundreds of political prisoners. People are jailed for just sharing something on social media.
Authoritarian governments that have a tighter grip on their public enjoy a broader latitude in what they can do, and they look through the shocks and costs. At the moment, Russia is dominant in terms of the military balance on the battlefield. So there are no reasons why Russia would retreat at the moment.
So although Russia is in a precarious position, it's Europe that's at a crossroads. And for Ukraine, the outlook is extremely dark.
The cost of rebuilding Ukraine, it runs in excess of $1 trillion, according to some estimates. The US has been the guarantor of peace and stability in Europe for decades. So the stakes are enormous. Look, no one wants to spend more on weapons, but this is the new reality we face.
We have to remember that this is the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II. Russia is attempting to redraw the borders of a neighboring state. It's a country that voluntarily gave up a nuclear weapons stockpile on the promise of security assurances from Britain, the US and Russia, which have proved to be illusory. So it's a key moment for the world in the 21st century as to whether the world is going to be governed by rules and laws or whether it's going to be governed by power and the willingness to impose that power.